So we talked a lot. I talked a lot on this show about ICE and what was going on in Minneapolis, but generally more broadly about ICE violating rights and in especially the rights of often of American citizens. And I know you've worked on a on a case that has to do with ICE detaining an American citizen. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this case?
Yeah, so we represent Leo Garcia Venegas. He's an American citizen. He is Hispanic. His family's from Mexico, but he was born in Florida. He's a construction worker in his early 20s down in southern Alabama. And over the last year, he has been unlawfully detained by ICE and other federal immigration officers three separate times. Um, uh, so I'll tell you about each of them briefly,
Yeah.
and then I'll tell you about the case. So the first occurred in May of last year. He was working on a privately owned construction site, pouring concrete. This property was fenced. It had no trespassing sign up, so nobody would mistake this for a place that like ordinary people could just wander around, right? Much less government officials. And while he was there with a crew of other concrete workers, a team of federal officers, including ICE folks, including FBI, stormed the site, chased down people, ran right past black and white construction workers who were working across the street and just went for all the Hispanic construction workers in a big kind of dragnet storming of the site. Didn't have a warrant, to our knowledge, didn't have any individualized probable cause, any prior knowledge of any specific individual on this site. Just saw a bunch of Hispanic construction workers and stormed on in and started detaining people. And our client Leo was tackled to the ground. There's a video of him. You can look it up online saying, "I'm a citizen. I have my papers. I'm a citizen. I'll show you my papers." There's the white and black construction workers who are taking a video from kind of the side. They're shouting, sorry for my language, but they're shouting, "What the fuck? He didn't do anything wrong. He's a citizen. Why are you doing this?" I mean, it's a
Hmm.
really tragic scene to watch,
Yeah.
but they eventually pull his wallet out of his pockets. They see his real ID, which is the thing the government tells all of us we're supposed to have because it's so important. They tell him that's fake, it's not real. They detain him for another 45 minutes, hour, and he's begging them the whole time, look up my social security number. I'm a citizen. I have my papers, and they finally let him go after realizing they have a citizen right all along. Leo didn't do anything to provoke this. The only thing he did was record them arresting his brother with a phone. So, I mean, if that's provocation or if that's obstructing an arrest, I don't really know what is. He's just observing them, right, on private property that they invaded.
Yeah.
And after this happened, ICE did the thing that they always do, or DHS did the thing they always do. They say, we never detain American citizens. This was not wrongful. This was a targeted investigation. This was a targeted raid. It's the same stock line they trot out about all of these incidents. So Leo was, of course, traumatized by this and afraid to go back to work, but he has to work. He has to earn a living. So he went back to work after a few weeks, and then he's inside of a house, almost fully built house, on another private residential construction site, and he sees an officer outside the window of the house he's working on, and then there's somebody comes up behind him in the bedroom he's working on. So he's sort of cornered, right, from both directions. He's, working with headphones on. He takes his headphones off. They order him to come out of the house. He says, "I'm a citizen. I have my real ID." They said, "We have to check anyway." They pull him into a lineup at the edge of the development. So they pull him off his work site. They kind of frog march him into this lineup of people and then detain him for another, 30 minutes. And then they finally say, "Oh, you guys are citizens. You can go. And other people are not citizens. They have to stay, right, and get deported." So again, you have them not treating his real ID as evidence of citizenship or lawful status, treating him as suspicious as potentially an illegal immigrant just because he's doing a blue collar job on a construction site and he's Hispanic. Um, and so Leo, in the span of 2 months, is detained twice by these guys on construction sites he's working on. And then most recently, he went to Mexico for a couple months to visit family, which he does every year. He got back about a month ago. I don't have the exact date at hand, but after he got back, within a dozen days, he was driving home and parked on his front yard, on his like driveway, right? Gets out, officers storm his yard, they tackle him. He says he has his real ID in his hand while they're tackling him because he knows it's coming. He sees them coming when he's getting out of his car. They tackle him. They put him in leg shackles and handcuffs. So he has a photo of him in their car with leg shackles on, and they detain him for 15 minutes, and they realize they have a citizen again. So they're just repeatedly, over and over again, detaining this guy. The car thing recently, the tailing him home and tackling him on his front lawn, it's because he was driving his brother's car, and they suspected his brother of being an illegal immigrant. So, I mean, this is just over and over and over again. This guy is not safe at work. He's not safe at home, and he's an American citizen who's just trying to work.
Yep.
I mean, it's
Yep.
completely wild, and that's for me. I mean, just even saying all those facts out loud, you say to yourself, "How could this be?" This seems completely crazy, but that's the world we're living in right now. And so our lawsuit has a number of goals, but we filed a case last year basically seeking to stop this, right? Basically seeking to stop DHS, ICE, all the federal agencies that are involved in these construction site raids from harassing American citizens at their jobs, right? Just because they happen to be working a low income job or blue collar job and look Hispanic. And that's what the case is really about. So we have, Fourth Amendment arguments and other kinds of arguments, but that's in a nutshell, we want this to stop.
So run through some of the what would be some of the arguments for this. I mean, ICE is going to say, well, we're looking for illegal immigrants, and what choice do we have? We go where they work.
Mhm.
Construction sites are where they work. Is there an argument to be made that federal agents should not be allowed on private property unless there's what? They have a warrant, there's
Yeah.
probable cause. And then um, so run through some of the arguments in terms
Yeah.
of how you guys are hoping to stop this.
So we break this down into kind of three steps. And we ask ourselves, what would constitutional law enforcement look like here, right? Because there are constitutional ways to enforce immigration laws. You respect the Fourth Amendment, and the Fourth Amendment has requirements for all the things that they're doing here for searches and for seizures. So, for folks who don't remember, the Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures, including of homes, including of people, including of property, right? So, that's what this case is really about, is those basic Fourth Amendment requirements. And what makes a search reasonable at the starting point of that analysis is a warrant. It's a judge assessing your probable cause to invade somebody's property, including property you're working on, right? Where you expect that you're the one in control of that property. Strangers aren't going to come wandering in. A warrant is typically required to search property. And so that's, we've had the government, for example, say publicly that, oh, we suspect certain builders, certain construction companies of, having a higher percentage of illegal immigrants working for them. Fine. If you suspect that, go show that to a judge and get a warrant. Don't just treat yourself as the law, right? Because that is lawless. And so, step one, get a warrant. Step two, once you are constitutionally on one of these sites, don't just do a dragnet detention of everybody on the site. Seizures have to be individualized. You have to have individual assessments of people's culpability and behavior. And you have to reasonably suspect each individual person that you physically detain of some kind of crime or violation of the law. And so we say, look, you can come onto a site if you have a warrant. And once you're on that site, you can ask questions of people. You can have like kind of conversations to develop suspicion. You can come in with prior knowledge of them, but you can't just round up all the Mexican people, right? And you can't just round up all the people who look like Mexican
Yeah.
people, right? Including citizens, because that's the thing is you don't know. If you don't come in with, prior probable cause or prior knowledge of these people and you're just doing roundups, that's not a constitutional way to enforce the law because that's really just search and seize first and figure it out later. And the Constitution really has the opposite presumption that you have to have knowledge of culpability first before you start to enforce, right? And then finally, and this is the last thing we're saying, is that when somebody shows you the piece of paper that they say you're supposed to carry to prove that you're a citizen or here lawfully, you can't just ignore that, right? And that's what they're doing over and over and over again. So.
And are they ignoring the real ID because it really is easy to fake, or what are they seeking by ignoring it?
It's actually not as easy to fake as their position on this is that some states issue driver's licenses to people without having to be citizens or here
Yeah,
lawfully, right? And that's
yeah,
true in some states,
yeah.
but those aren't real IDs. Real IDs are stamped with a star or some other kind of insignia, um, and then they're certified by DHS. So the very agency doing all these raids is the agency that certifies real IDs as real IDs, and they all have a barcode scanner on the back.
Hmm.
And so if my client Leo shows his real ID, they can just whip out their barcode scanner and scan it and see in like 4 seconds that he's a citizen or that he's here lawfully. And they don't do that, right? They just say, I'll give you one example. There was a witness who submitted a declaration in the case, a sworn statement. And she did it anonymously because she's afraid of retaliation by the government. But she was detained on a landscaping site in Florida, just over the border from Alabama. And when they did that, she had papers, she had documentation on her, and she's like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this to me?" And the officer said to her, "Joe Biden made a lot of mistakes, so we can't trust your papers." Right? So that's like kind of the mentality of these officials is that there's just a new way of operating right now under this administration,
Yep.
and it's not the old way, right?
Yep. And it's not the constitutional way. So who do you take you take this to federal court in the state of Miami, in the state of Florida?
This is in Alabama, yeah.
Alabama.
Yeah, so it's in federal district court right now in Alabama. We sought a preliminary injunction, which is, halt this while the case is going on to prevent irreparable harm to our client. The sad thing is we asked for that 7 months ago, and then you see what happens if the courts don't act,
Yep.
right? I mean, he got injured again, right? In the constitutional sense of injured. And so, yeah, I mean, that's one thing we've asked for. The government has moved to dismiss the case. Their main argument in the case so far has been that he doesn't have standing. In other words, he's not injured and has no reason to fear it'll happen again, which is a thing that's actually happened again since they made that argument. So it's just kind of embarrassing for them. Um, and then we have other claims in the case too. But the big thing that's happening right now is let's see, what's the date right now? Today's the 18th. On the 27th, there's going to be a preliminary injunction hearing with live witness testimony. Our client's going to take the stand. Other construction workers are going to take the stand, and hopefully we'll be able to, question somebody from DHS if they can find somebody to put up there and defend the agency's actions. So hopefully the judge will act after that and do the right thing and protect, not just our client, but we've asked for the court to certify a class of construction workers so that a broad class of people is
Okay.
protected from these abuses. So
So this would be a national class. And
it's an Alabama-based class because of some
okay.
recent Supreme Court
Yep.
decisions that have limited
Yep.
the scope of injunctions and that kind of thing. So we're
Yep.
focusing on protecting folks in southern
In
Alabama.
Alabama.
Yeah.
Okay. And so so a win would basically the court would provide some guidance to ICE in terms of how they can enter private property.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that the court needs to say a warrant is required to enter properties that are closed to the public, right? If it's an
Hmm.
open property, if it's a parking lot, there are certain types of properties the government doesn't need a warrant to enter, right? If it's just
Yep.
sort of open to everybody, the parts of a store that are open to the public, please don't need to get a warrant to go in
Yep.
there. But if we're talking about a fenced property with no trespassing signs and people actively working in dangerous construction materials, like that is not an open site. So get a warrant, establish individualized suspicion before you detain people and stop ignoring real IDs. That's really what the injunction would say.
And what is your sense about how often this happens? That is, that citizens or legal residents are being detained like this. Is this a one-off, or is this something that happens quite a bit?
No, I think it's happening all over the country. I mean, the stock line again from DHS is that this doesn't happen. I mean, they're literally they've gone out there and claimed that it's just fake news. In fact, they responded to our case by saying fake news, which is we have videos, you can watch them. It's not hard to see with
Yep.
your own eyes, right? But there was a ProPublica article that came out last year that said they looked at a bunch of news stories and talked to people, and they cataloged 170 cases at least of U.S. citizens who have been wrongfully detained. And that's the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we're talking about just people who are willing to have their stories shared, who are willing to come out in public and make themselves known, or whose stories get a lot of attention. There are countless people whose stories never make the news, who don't want to raise a big fight about it,
Sure.
whose stories go untold, right?
Yeah. That's great. I mean, it's good that you guys are taking this up. I mean, the whole ICE issue seems to be getting away with murder, and it's very difficult to figure out because most of their targets are illegal immigrants. It's
Yeah.
difficult to figure out how do you rein them in, and how do you. So this is great to find a way to try to restrict their actions and to rein them in.
Yeah, and I just would say that this is an issue that is very politically charged.
Hmm.
And IJ, we're not partisan. We don't typically get involved in those kinds of fights.
Yep.
But when there are really grave threats to individual rights, right? Um, we see it as our role to step in and say, look, right or left, Republican, Democrat, I don't really care, but the Constitution is the Constitution, and if you're going to have these laws on the books, you have to enforce them in a constitutional manner to the extent possible, just like drug laws, right? I mean, what everyone thinks of drug laws, and I think they're terrible. Police have to be able to enforce them consistent with the Constitution. They can't just run roughshod all over everybody, right?